Okay, we're on.
Oh, we're on. Okay. Yeah, we're planning to read a little more from Tony Greenstein's excellent book, Zionism in the Holocaust. And really, my hat is off to this guy because I used to consider myself a half a historian of the 20th century, forgetting, you can forget all about the earlier centuries. But I thought I had a pretty good grasp on the 20th century. It turns out that the more you read of a guy like Greenstein, the more you realize you don't know shit. So, anyway, I want to say just a couple of words about history. The word itself comes from the Greek and so forth, but in the Christian era, it became thought of as his story, his being God. So the concept of God or God Himself is the only power that can know history. In other words, it's an impossible task for you and I and Elsa and anybody else. We can read this and that, but for a human being, you definitely have to specialize. And Greenstein has just done the job on the so-called Holocaust. I say so-called because we're talking about the murder of Jews in Europe and in that period, and it's been come to be known as the Holocaust. So, just a couple of things, we everybody has a feeling that they know something about history. At least we know the highlights. You know, the problem is knowing the highlights is basically the synopsis that the ruling class, the hegemonic powers, give to us. So we know. I think Elsa mentioned the only thing they learned about the Holocaust was they made soap out of the victims in some of the concentration camps. Well, uh, that's not even getting started, and probably never even happened. But when you get to the synopsis or the highlights of a different period, what you get is in a very few words. The fewer the words, the better. For example, so and so was a dictator. Saddam was a dictator. Noriega was a dictator. Putin is now a dictator. Gaddafi was a dictator. So you know exactly one word. And that word is provided to you by, as I say, the people that control the culture and control the information. And they're just giving you a bite size, a bit of nothingness, really. But I would elaborate a little bit on this word dictator. After 9/11, they passed the Patriot Act and they passed, I have it here, uh, a number of laws, executive orders, giving, I did have it here, the several different executive orders, which gave the executive of the United States the power to declare anybody in the world and in the United States as a terrorist suspect. They could be jailed without charges. They could be assassinated. American citizens were assassinated overseas, and for suspicion or according to their determination, was a terrorist suspect. So if that's not dictatorship, I don't know what is. Well, that can't be, not in our country. We have elections. Well, we've talked about these elections. You got choice between, let's just say, two dictators, because they all have these executive privileges and executive powers. And this has been the objective. This was one of the greatest objectives of the 9/11 inside job in 2001. You think this was for merriment or for what's his name to make a few $1 billion on the buildings? Well, yeah, that was just icing on the cake. The main thing was to launch these wars throughout the Middle East to basically the security state, the security establishment ramped up on steroids. What you go through at the airport and cameras everywhere and eavesdropping by the security state, and all of this. This is the objective. So we're if you're in the States, you're living in a dictatorship. You don't think so? Well, try stepping out of line. So that's basically what I want to say. But getting back to Geenstein, he has done the world a service. We're talking, as I said, 650 pages, thousands, perhaps 10,000 footnotes, carefully done. And he leaves nothing to question. He proves his case that the Nazis and the Zionists were intertwined, allied, and working on the same project. So let's get to, I think we're going to read the infamous Nuremberg Laws. It came out in 1935. Back up just a second, though, to the Reichstag fire. That was in 1933, just weeks after Hitler was appointed by the establishment as a chancellor. Well, this immediately was burnt down. The Reichstag building, the Congress, was burned down by the Nazis, and we all know that. And they blamed on the communists. And immediately, something called the Enabling Laws, or the Enabling Act, was passed, giving extraordinary emergency powers to the executive, just like 9/11. Okay? This is how it's done. This is called governance in our modern era. So they passed that, and then they started setting up the concentration camps for the communists. And as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, well, we saw that happening. They rounded up all the communists, and then they came after the socialists, and then they came after the other groups and the Jews and the Gypsies, and some of the Christians that were speaking out, Catholic and Protestant. But then they came to my door, and there was no relief. So the point is, we're now living under the Enabling Act, call it the Patriot Act, in the United States. You're living in a dictatorship by any other name. So getting to Greenstein, let's let Greenstein tell us so we can learn something about this enabling act and the attitude of the Zionists towards these policies.
All right. The Nuremberg Laws. The Nazis began the attack on Jews with the April 1933 Law for the Restitution of the Professional Civil Service and the July Law for the Revocation of German Citizenship. This was in parallel with the law to prevent offspring with hereditary diseases of July 1933. On 15 September 1935, the Nuremberg Laws, the most murderous legislative instrument known to European history, were enacted, depriving German Jews of their citizenship and forbidding sexual relations between Jews and Aryans. From now on, the Jews were subjects. 12 days later, they were amended to include Romanis,
Romani, I think.
Romanis, and black people.
Gypsies.
Yeah. The Nuremberg Laws consisted of two separate laws, the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor. The latter law, which prohibited Jews from flying the German flag, expressly permitted them to display the Zionist blue, white, blue flag. The Nuremberg Laws were equally applicable to the Gypsies, the introduction to which stated that if the Jews had a state of their own in which the bulk of their people were at home, the Jewish question would already be considered solved today. The ardent Zionists of all people have objected least of all to the basic ideas of the Nuremberg Laws because they know that these laws are the only correct solution for the Jewish people too.
Quoting, who are we quoting there? I missed that.
It's the introduction of the Nuremberg Laws. That's what it states.
Well, I thought we had a comment there by a Zionist leader.
Moshe Makover.
That's all right. Go ahead.
George
Okay.
Kreisky, a banker and president of the German state revisionist Zionists, was interviewed in Der Angriff under the heading Nuremberg Laws Fulfill Ancient Demands. The Nazis tried to foist Kreisky, a Gestapo agent, upon Germany's Jews, as the Palestine Post noted. The position is now such that no Jew can speak in Germany if Mr. Kreisky objects, and that anyone who offends him is liable to severe penalties for an attitude of animosity towards the state. This is what the Gestapo told the representatives to the state of German Jews. As Nathan Weinstock noted, the Nazi propaganda vehicle gleefully introduced the interview with the remark that the ghetto regulations enforced in Germany found favor among some sections of Jewish opinion. The religious press in Palestine welcomed the Nuremberg Laws, viewing Nazi Germany as a force substantiating Zionist and religious theses.
Zionist and religious what?
Theses?
Pardon me?
Theses. Theses.
Oh, thesis. Well, it is a thesis. Okay.
But plural. The religious Orthodox monthly Ha-Hed took comfort in the fact that Jews would return to Judaism. Zionist executive president Menahem Usiskin was effusive. There's something positive in their German Jewry tragedy, and that is that Hitler oppressed them as a race and not as a religion. Had he done the latter, half of the Jews in Germany would simply have converted to Christianity. For most Jews, the preservation of life came first. For Zionism, the preservation of the Jewish nation, race was more important. Reinhard Heydrich, who became the head of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, explained that the Nazis were in agreement with the great spiritual movement within Jewry itself. Zionism, whose position is based on the recognition of the unity of Jewry and the Zionists applauded the recognition of Jews as a racial minority and the establishment of separate spheres along religious and racial lines. Joachim Prince explained that the Jews have been drawn out of the last recesses of christening and mixed marriages. We are not unhappy about it. The theory of assimilation has collapsed. We are no longer hidden in secret recesses. We want to replace assimilation by something new, the declaration of belonging to the Jewish nation and the Jewish race. A state built according to the principles of purity of the nation and race can only be honored and respected by a Jew who declares his belonging to his own kind. Cesarani observed that Zionists saw the pressure towards segregation as fulfillment of their assertion that Jews were a separate nation with no place in Germany. In their hatred of Jewish assimilation, the Zionist movement had ended up welcoming the Nuremberg Laws. The Hanover branch of the RJF charged that because of their demand for national minority rights, Zionism was to blame for the discriminatory legislation. Years later, in an interview with Lenny Brenner, Prince acknowledged that we were mistaken. We thought now, listen, there's a German government now, based upon a German nationalism. Well, let's sit down together and talk to them, but it never happened. We asked whether there was a Jewish problem in New Jersey, where he lived. Prince responded that no, America is a completely different thing. Prince immigrated to the United States and later admitted that none of the Zionist ideology about the inevitability of anti-Semitism made any sense in a different environment. The Nuremberg Laws were the product of Nazi, not Zionist thinking. However, the RJF were correct when they said that Zionism had provided the anti-Semites with political ammunition. That's the end of the Nuremberg Laws.
Well, go on. The part about applying these Nuremberg laws and the problem of determining who was a Jew. You see, as you'll read, Geenstein asserts that there is no such thing as a race. Okay, and sure enough, the Nazis tied themselves into knots, trying to determine what was a Jew and what was not a Jew. Whether, one grandparent or two grandparents and so forth. So continue on.
The Mischlinge and the privileged Jews.
These white nationalists are going to have the same problem if they ever get their way. Well, who is white anyway? This guy's got a American Indian in his lineage and so forth.
Yeah.
So
I'm
race is a concept and it doesn't exist in reality.
I said I'm not white.
Go ahead.
You should see me in the summer.
You look kind of white. Let me get my color.
You should see me in the summer, and the summer really tan and nice. But no, on my mom's side, I have a great grandmother that's Native American. So.
Well, there's a good example. Yeah.
Very proud.
So,
okay.
Yeah, if the white nationalists get in power, you're going to have to make sure you stay out of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
That's how ridiculous it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, I keep seeing these TikToks of like Hispanics, and they're like, they're like trying to fit in now with American society. They're like wearing wigs and like singing like country music, just doing these like spoofs. So they don't get deported, they're like trying to fit in.
Anyway. I notice around here, a lot of the women carry umbrellas all the time. I think it's to try and, I don't know. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, they are obsessed with whiteness in Mexico, for sure.
Yeah, it seems so, yeah.
Although the Nuremberg Law definition of who was Jewish was based on race, it faced an insurmountable difficulty. Race doesn't exist. The definition of who was a Jew had to be based on past adherence to the Jewish religion. going back to 1870. A Jew was someone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents or someone who was a practicing Jew. Someone with 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents was classified as a Mischlinge of the second or first degree, respectively. Membership of the Jewish community meant being classified as a full Jew regardless. Bernhard Lausener, head of the Jewish department in the Interior Ministry, had, with the Mischlinge, created a third race. According to the census of 16 June 1933, there were about 210,000 Mischlinge of the first degree and 80,000 of the second degree in Germany. About 80% were Protestants, and the other 20% were either Catholic or of no religion. These were the persecuted non-Jews. In 1939, 72,000 first-degree Mischlinge and 39,000 second-degree Mischlinge were still living in Germany. Being a convert to Christianity or married to an Aryan partner was a key factor in the survival of thousands of European Jews. In Greater Germany alone, in 1939, there were about 30,000 intermarried couples who were divided up into the privileged and non-privileged couples, of whom 3/4 were the former. Where there were children, the Jewish partner was privileged unless the children were brought up as Jewish. Where the woman was Jewish and childless, she was also privileged. Most did not bring up their children as Jewish. The category of privileged Jews was extended to Jews married to Mischlinge of the second degree on 1st September 1941.
See how stupid the whole goddamn thing is? Go ahead.
Between 1941 and 1944, German Jews in mixed marriages, both privileged and non-privileged, were generally exempt from deportation. On 18 December 1943, Himmler ordered the deportation of Jews in mixed marriages, with 2 exceptions. However, the deportations did not occur because it was felt that their deportation might jeopardize the whole destruction process. Despite pressure from party Puritans who wanted second-degree Mischlings to be considered Aryans and first-degree Mischlings to be treated as Jews, this never happened. When the RSHA were preparing to deport all first-degree Mischlings, Lausener wrote to Himmler in September 1942 to prevent this occurring. The Mischlinge gave the Nazis flexibility in case senior government officials or Nazis were found to be Jewish. Ministerialrat Leo Killy of the Fuhrer Chancellery was a second-degree Mischlinge who had married a first-degree Mischlinge and sought to be classified as an Aryan. Hitler gave the status of first-degree Mischlinge to 340 Jews. The Mischlinge were subject to the draft, but whereas the Mischlings of the Old Reich survived, those in the occupied Eastern Territories were considered full Jews and murdered. A Mischlinge of the first degree was not allowed to marry a German without permission. Although extramarital affairs with Germans were not forbidden, an SS circular stipulated that they would be punished if they did. Up to 1942, 61 Jews were convicted of Rassenschande, racial pollution. Hitler, however, ordered that no woman could be convicted of Rassenschande. In Poland, privileged Jews in both categories of Mischlinge were ghettoized, despite the protests of Lausener. Lausener, an avid supporter of the Zionist option and the principal author of the Nuremberg Laws, wished his definition to apply everywhere. A conference on the question by the Ministry of Eastern Occupied Territories decided in January 1942 on a new and stricter definition. A Jew was anyone with a Jewish parent or of whom there was the slightest indication that he adhered to the Jewish religion.
They had a number of conferences. You know, that class, they love conferences, even today, or especially today. Any excuse to have a conference. And of course, they got the 5-star hotels, and they go and opinionate and commiserate, and this is their job, and then they get a big paycheck for it. But anyway, they apparently had he'll go on to mention a number of conferences trying to figure this naughty problem out.
Yeah.
Who is a Jew, and how the first degree and the second degree, the Mischling, and so forth. Did it ever occur to these motherfuckers that they're barking up the wrong tree and they don't know their ass from a hole in the ground? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think Israel has the same problem. You know, they're
Yeah.
always having who's Jewish. You know, I guess it's like through the mother. Or,
Yeah. But what if the mother's a Michelin?
yeah.
Or maybe yeah, I don't know. It's just so stupid. But yeah, it's a big issue in Israel. We'll have to go into that. I'll have to look into that more.
Are we going to continue? We're up to 25 minutes already. I know we said we
Yeah,
wanted to.
let's read. This guy is so good that our listeners can definitely learn more, I'm sure. Read another 10 minutes.
All right. The deportation of German Jewry. By 1939, only 16% of German Jewry were employed, and half of them were badly paid workers. Yet, because of the war from 1940 onwards, there was a constant demand for Jewish labor replacements in the Reich. On 14 March 1941, the Labor Ministry advertised in a circular for 73,123 Warthegau Jews, which Hitler canceled. On September 1941, Gauleiter Karl Kaufmann pressed Hitler to deport Germany's Jews as a consequence of the bombing of Hamburg. At a final solution conference of the RSHA on 10 October 1941, Heydrich alluded to Hitler's desire to make Germany Judenrein by the end of the year. The first deportations of Jews were 1,300 from Stettin and Schneidelmühl and Pomerania to Lublin in February and March 1940, and 7,500 from Baden and Sarpholz in autumn of 1940 to unoccupied France. From 18 October to December 1941, there began the first major deportations of German Jews to Nazi ghettos, Minsk, Riga, Kaunas, and Lodz. In October 1941, the Jews of Hamburg were deported. As they were taken to the train station, Lucille Eichengreen, a 17-year-old Jewish girl, described how the non-Jewish population watched them stony-faced. It made me feel afraid. Most of the nearly 60,000 Jews from the Old Reich deported between October 1941 and February 1942 did not die immediately. Hitler intended that they should replace the Jews of the Soviet Union who had been massacred. The final rounding up of the Jews in Berlin was done entirely by the Jewish police. The first German Jews to be systematically murdered were the 5,000 who were deported to Kaunas. They were shot by Karl Einsatzkommando 3 between 15 and 23 November 1941. Prior to that, 5,000 had been murdered by the Lithuanian Activist Front, the LAF. The first 1,000 German Jews deported to Riga on 27 November arrived on 30 November. Himmler told Heydrich on 30 November at 1:30 p.m. after a conversation with Hitler, Jewish transport from Berlin, no liquidation. However, the Jews had already been shot earlier that day at Rumbula, together with about 24,000 Jews from the Riga ghetto. Subsequent deportations of German Jews were placed in the Riga ghetto. David Irving used Himmler's note of his phone call to Heydrich as the basis of his argument that Hitler knew nothing of the Holocaust. Hitler's instructions were probably the result of foreign journalists' inquiries about the fate of the Berlin deportees and the uproar among German occupation and military officials in Riga over the previous massacres of German Jews. The General Commissar of Minsk, Wilhelm Kube, protested about the treatment of German Jews. I am certainly tough and ready to help solve the Jewish question, but human beings come from our own cultural sphere are something other than the native bestial hordes. Kube insisted on maintaining German Jews as headquarters staff and even had the nerve to suggest that nobody would come to any harm if he listened to Jewish music. As one of the old fighters, he developed scruples about exterminating German Jews despite being an extreme anti-Semite. Hilberg described this as one of the strangest episodes in the history of the Nazi regime. Gerald Reitlinger was also fascinated by it. Anti-Zionism did not have the roots within German society that is often suggested. By June 1942, only 54,000 Jews were left in Berlin. Goebbels noted in his diary on 30 September 1942, the Fuhrer has once again expressed a resolve to remove the Jews from Berlin at all costs. By mid-June 1943, most of the remaining Jews in Berlin had been deported. Yet, on 6-7th of April 1944, Hitler resolved to contact Himmler and get him to supply 100,000 Jews because of the labor shortage. When victory seemed imminent, extermination was pursued. When the military situation reversed, there were concessions to economic considerations. Even Hitler could display a great deal of ideological flexibility. In Frankfurt, less than 600 Jews out of 10,500 survived the war. Mass deportations of the 51,000 Viennese Jews began in the spring of 1941. By the 1st of November 1944, registered Jews in Germany totaled just 12,930, most of whom were privileged Jews or Mischling. By the end of 1944, there were just 6,500 Jews in the Reich Protectorate area. The number of Jews left in Austria by the end of 1944 was 5,799, most of whom were privileged. Despite the fact that leaders of the Reichswehrgang RV, the Nazi-imposed Jewish Council, were becoming aware in 1942 and 43 of what resettlement in the East meant. They continued organizing the transports. As death notices began arriving back and rumors of mass shootings spread, Jews chose to go into hiding. RV staff were under orders to inform their functionaries, who in turn informed the Gestapo. The Gestapo's factory operation of 10 March 1943 rounded up and deported the last Jewish armament workers. Many went into hiding, but they could not hope for any assistance from the RV, which assiduously maintained its card files on the whereabouts of Jews in Berlin. They even requested permission from the RSHA to update them. In the Berlin Jewish community, the registry had been maintained for many years so conscientiously and with such zeal that it proved ultimately harmful for those registered. Paul Epstein, one of the leaders of the RV, had proposed to the Nazis that a special levy be imposed on deportees to pay for the cost of equipping them. The Gestapo agreed and used it to pay for the deportations. Some 1,400 Jews reportedly survived the war by hiding out in Berlin. There were also some 6,700 living legally in the city, most of whom were married to Aryans. Sturmbannführer Stock, who took over in Vienna from Alois Brunner at the end of November 1942, organized the Major Aktion in February 1943. The Gestapo and community employees, in a joint effort, looked for the relatives of arrested persons to bring families together. Only a few thousand Jews hid undiscovered in the Reich Protectorate area until liberation. The RV had now developed into an effective tool of the Gestapo. In February-March 1943, the only successful protest against the deportations took place when mainly non-Jewish wives demonstrated outside of the Gestapo headquarters in Rosenstrasse, Berlin, against the deportations of their husbands. The roundup of Jews and mixed marriages in Mischling had begun on 23 February. The protest grew to several hundred, and on 6 March, Goebbels gave the order that those arrested were to be released. It was estimated that there were some 35,000 such Jews in Germany, the majority of whom had emigrated by 1939. And then by 1933, the rate of intermarriage among German Jewry had reached 44%.
Okay, well, yeah, we're going to continue with this reading because I'm going to try and shut up and listen because this guy's done, as I said before, he's done the best work on this period. I think we mentioned earlier in another episode about Lenny Brenner's great work, uh, Zionism in the Age of the Dictators, and then his later work in about 81, I think it was, 51 documents. So they the Zionists were scandalized by these revelations and wanted Lenny to shut up, and called him an anti-Semite. And so his second book was brilliant. It just published the 51 documents between correspondence between Goebbels and Herzl and Eichmann and so on, so that you could read it for people could read it for themselves. Then the great book by Schoenman came out in the 90s, early 90s. This book is the most recent and based on documents that have been uh, revealed since then. And it's really unsurpassed, and it's conclusive.
Yeah.
And so anybody that wants to read it,
Well, that would be a good one. That would be a good one to read because it's like pretty short, you know?
which one?
The Showman. It's short and concise. I have it too.
Yeah, we could read some of that. As I say, though, you can't do better than Greenstein, chapter and verse.
No, I know. It's just it's a little like dense and there's just so much information. The Showman's, just really concise and I mean
Gives it more concise and steps back a little
yeah,
bit.
I mean it's like 100 pages I think. So
Yeah, we could read some of that.
we'll say for that.
Another book that I'm just starting is by Roger Giraudy, the French was a French communist intellectual, and he's written a wonderful book. But these were written earlier.
Yeah.
Uh, but just one more word before we close about Greenstein. Would you believe that he's been accused now? He was kicked out of the Labor Party for anti Semitism. He's Jewish, in case you don't know, and grew up in an Orthodox Jewish household and so on. And now he's being charged by the state as well. He's facing charges. I'll have to look into how that case is going, but he's been charged under the law about anti-Semitism. And just one final point about this term, anti-Semitism. It's the most ridiculous word in the language. Semitic languages are languages from the Middle East. They include Hebrew, but they also include Arabic, and they also include Akkadian and several other different languages from the Middle East. So why they decided way back in the 19th century to talk about anti-Semites or Semites or anti-Semitism is still a pretty big mystery. But the Ashkenazi in Europe, they generally didn't speak Hebrew. Since Israel came about, they've made a big push to make students learn Hebrew. But they spoke their own languages, French, German, etc., or that Yiddish. which was a kind of a specifically a Jewish language, offshoot of German. But to talk about anti-Semitism is rather ridiculous. But I have one theory about that. They don't want to talk about Jew hatred. They want to make it just a little more subtle, because a little more nuanced. Like, because a lot of people say, "Well, no, I don't hate Jews, but I think they got a terribly ridiculous religion, and I don't think they are really German or really should be part of our community and or with equal rights, and I think they got very strange religious practices and things like that. So, no, I don't hate you, but they should definitely be discriminated against. So I think that's why. But that term it just can't last another generation. It's just so ridiculous. But yeah, so Greenstein is charged with anti-Semitism because they have, in these conferences, they have defined anti-Semitism as anti-Israel or anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. It's just playing with definitions. Of course, the Jews are the main opponents of Zionism. Tens, hundreds of thousands of Jews that are marching in the streets and suffering repercussions, being beat up by the police, charged, kicked out of school. And these great Jewish scholars that we've just been talking about, the main opposition to these Zionist cutthroats in Israel, which represented about 2% of the Jewish population in Europe and the United States before the war, but they were the designated, by imperialism, the designated leaders, spokespeople, so forth, of the Jewish people. So now, if you're against that those Zionist nationalist fanatics, murderers, well, then you're anti-Semitism. You're anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
Please,
bringing it
please.
close
This
to
is
home.
the reason we're. Yeah.
Americans are the ones.
What was that?
I said Americans are the ones, protesting mainly our murderous, warmongering government, and we get labeled anti-American. You get
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same thing. Exactly the same. It's exactly the same thing. So anyway, this is a reason we're going to read more of Greenstein and Schoenman and these people and Brenner, because you have to learn to make these distinctions. If they can put the categories in front of you, 2 or 3 words, and you don't look underneath the cover or anything, you're going to be played. And we're being played, and people like Greenstein and others are suffering because they're getting persecuted for being anti-Semitic, and it's just ridiculous.
Okay. Well,
all right, Elsa.
Until next time, please like the video, subscribe, share with your friends, comment, please. Anything will help. Until next time.
Okay. Bye.